Then in the second step, now we can use this cross-section curve and use those rings, the cut section ring and the offset ring, as our rail curves to use the surface tool, so we can basically sweep this cross-section curve around or along those rails. So let's do this. So we can go to the B-rail surface tool, double click it, and we only have one generation curve, but we have now two rail curves. So we can select the first generation curve and then select our first rail and then select the second rail. And then Alias is creating a surface. And you notice actually that it only created half of the Bezzel actually I'm looking for. And the reason for that is, as you can maybe see, there's a thicker green line and a thicker green line there. So what does that mean? Let me select the surface and delete it. This means, considering that a NURB surface again is a flat piece of paper, 4 edges, and this is just the left and the right edge of this sheet of paper which we rotated and bent around so it forms the top surface of our joystick. And whenever you do an operation over an edge, very often the tools will stop where the edges are. So in case I would have started building this button maybe on the back surface, I would not have that issue. Because if I go into select curve on surface and click this curve, you also see that I have half a curve of my ring selected, and here is the other half. So that's, however, not really a big problem. So let's go back to our B-rail, click the generation curve, I click the first rail and the second rail, select nothing. Then I can select maybe this curve and then this B rail and that rail, and then create my second part. And you noticed instead of just clicking the original arc I sketched here, I clicked on the edge of my B rail surface. So Alias here is pretty smart in also understanding that maybe there is a matching and usable edge you could use. So of course the same result I could achieve by clicking on our curve, then clicking on the first rail and then clicking on the second rail, and there it is. So that's one way then, or another way how we could create that surface for our Bezzel. And if I show the button now, there you can see now that it slightly goes up, and maybe it's a little bit too high. Let's see if we can maybe modify it. So I selected the vertex here, and you notice that immediately my Bezzel surfaces become highlighted in magenta, which means again if I am going to change this curve, I'm going to affect also the surface that curve is generating through the by rail command. And it's going to transform and move. And let's say maybe I should be more like this. And then Aliases updates it for me. Maybe this looks a little bit more attractive. And to finish this one, maybe you might ask yourself, well, why did I create a second offset curve and then to sketch a profile and then used the bi-rail? Couldn't I just have used the generation curve and then the inner ring? But for example, from the front, you can see that the surface is not flat, it slightly is arced. So what I would like to do is that this cross section that I created, and let me select it, this one, this first point is always resting on the ring, kind of like where we created this tunnel. And then the second point, this one, is always resting on a curve, and that curve rests on the surface. So this way I can make sure that the surface I created is really starting at my tunnel and then really resting also on my upper surface. And I do not have, for example, the Bezzel setting maybe somewhere here intersecting into the joystick, or maybe up here the Bezzel setting stopping on top of the surface. And with this Bezzel surface created, there's one last thing then that we should do, because currently this surface is just on top. Let's make it invisible. And the surface in between the offset curve and the tunnel we have to remove. And we can go to Surface Edit, Trim, and then select this surface and this surface and say discard. And then let's show our objects again. Now this is more logical and plausible approach. You see the surface comes up, flows into the Bezzel, and then the Bezzel flows into the upper part of our joystick. And then you could, if you would like to organize your surface a little bit more, select all surfaces and maybe copy them into one. And maybe that's what I'm going to do now. So I select surfaces, select everything, go assign, and then maybe hide my surface here, and then this part, for example, I leave alone because that might be a more might be better than not combining it, for example, with my button. Or actually I could just simply put them both together as well. It's not really a big problem. Assign, okay. And then maybe this surface, then I could delete because I don't need it anymore. This surface, for example, I can also delete. And then here I have my nice set.